We will start with the meditation on the tarot key, the Hierophant, tarot key number 5, Vav, from the Book of Tokens. As that which uniteth all things in the world of the manifest, I am rightly made known by Vav the nail. Because I am all and in all, therefore am I the link or bond which joineth together the parts of the fabric of existence. In all the universe there is no break. By bonds indissoluble, each point is fastened to every other. Behind the separate existences is the unity of my being, which is as a net, gathering together all these many forms. Nothing existeth alone. All things are in combination. Manifestation requireth the appearance of separate parts. When I show forth my power, what I bring into existence must seem other than myself. And because I am wholly free, I present myself to myself in an endless variety of forms. Yet is the seeming isolation of class and kind, the separateness of creatures, naught but illusion, which deludeth me not, nor are they by it deceived, in whom my wisdom has ripened. Unfathomed and unfathomable is the great deep of mine interior nature. In the unplumbed abyss of the no-thing, mine eternal will ariseth, and by the rising of that will, the no-thing cometh forth into the appearance of something. That will is the small point of all beginning, and its coming forth is a search for itself, for that will is a hunger and a desire and a longing. My nature being changeless, this eager longing altereth not. It is a thing concluded before all manifestation, a purpose unalterably decided upon, a determination which I confirm by mine experience. Out of that longing cometh the fixing of the boundaries of the universe. By it I draw the circle of the something, which emergeth from the illimitable deep of the no-thing. Therefore is this longing the root of Gebura, severity, for it restricteth the liberty of the no-thing, and produceth an appearance of limitation and separateness therein. The nail is a perfect symbol of this severity. It hath a property of sharpness and stringency, like the point of a nail, and again as a nail fasteneth together the parts of a house. So doth the desire of coming forth join together the parts of the universe, my dwelling place. These are mysteries, O Israel, difficult to understand. With much searching shalt thou still fail to grasp them, unless thy search be rightly prosecuted. Yet the way to understanding is ever open to him who will follow it steadfastly. It is the way of the heart, and thou shalt be guided therein by thine own inner hearing. Even this aspect of my nature, which presenteth itself under the signature of the letter Vav, is a promise and a fulfillment of the way of life, manifesting myself as the link which uniteth all the separate parts of my creation. I make myself known as the bond of union between creature and creature, and between the creatures and their Creator. The Creator is myself, and I am the nail which joineth thee to me. In thee am I ever present, and thou hast only to turn within to find me. Shut thine ears to the confusion of the world which surroundeth thee. Open thine inner hearing. Aspire earnestly to me. Verily thine aspiration is from me, and what sendeth thee in search of me is that same eager longing which hath brought thee forth, and it hath brought forth too the four worlds, and all that they contain. Thy search for me is mine own search for myself. Nor shall that quest of mine, which seemeth now to thee to be thine own pursuit of wisdom and of understanding, be doomed to failure. Whosoever thou art that readest or hearest these words, know that thou shalt come to me. I am the revealer of all mysteries. None other is the teacher of any man. These words that thou readest, or that perchance are read to thee, whose words are they but mine? I have brought thee before me for instruction, and whether thou receivest it willingly or unwillingly, know that because thou hast this day heard or read these words, thou art henceforth consciously united to me. Today thou mayest reject me. Today thou mayest receive these words with scorn. Off. I still hear it. She got my mental thought, but she didn't turn the right button. I was sending you the mental message, but you just didn't turn the right button. Today thou mayest reject me. Today thou mayest receive these words with scorn. Yet it shall be that my voice shall go with thee henceforth forever. When thou sleepest, it shall instruct thee, and even when thou art busiest with the affairs of daily life, it shall ring suddenly in thine inner ear. Forever art thou bound to me, and in a day, or a month, or a year, or a lifetime, or 100 lifetimes, thou shalt know this, even as I know it. And when thou hast reached this goal, what shall be a day, or a month, or a year, or a lifetime, or 100 lifetimes? Time ceaseth for those who come to me. The quest will be forgotten when thou hast reached the goal. Tonight, we are going to take up the next aspect of traveling the paths of return on the tree of life as they have been practiced, as they have been taught down through the centuries before Isaac, before David, before Solomon, before Jacob, right back to the days, indeed, of Abraham. And the part of the work that we're going to discuss with you tonight in terms of the paths, and remember, the paths are the connecting link between the Sephirith. The Sephirith are the circles, and they are the intelligences or emanations of God's consciousness, as well as called the spheres of activity. They also are the evolutionary level that the divine is functioning on in expression, remember, in the manifest. And they also, therefore, are the indications of our own evolutionary levels. That is, that part of our evolutionary development which is in full function. So always try to keep in mind, although we'll remind you of it ourselves, the paths are really our subjective powers of consciousness. The Sephirith, which incidentally are also called paths, but they have this other aspect in meaning. These Sephirith are the spheres of activity in terms of the level of our subjective understanding or unfoldment. So you see, they are interrelated, and one cannot be understood without the other. Just like our consciousness can have no formation of an idea or an impact from the senses, except that the nerve currents travel and report to the brain. In the same way, these paths, which are assigned to the tree, and which you are studying incidentally at home in your lessons when you are at that point of the work where you are taking up the tarot. These are the paths, these are the aspects which stir the activity, which connect the different parts of our expression. And the nerve currents are really about the best analogy that we can give you because it's almost exact. And remember, the more complex the nervous system is, the more highly evolved the type of consciousness, the more complex the thinking, feeling processes, the more awareness as to just what is going on about us and within us. And of course, man has the most highly complex nervous system. The tree of life is the symbolic pattern or representation of the subtle part of that body, that nervous system, that brain, that level, or these different levels of function and expression which we have, as a miniature aspect in terms of God. That's why the tree is called both the macrocosm, which is the aspect in expression of God, and the microcosm, that is, our smaller participation, exactly in replica, incidentally, as that which is the vast one, the indivisible, blessed be his name. Now, because we are going to cover the aspect on the tree which involves one of the most important subjects in occultism, though little understood and recognized, we are going to read to you another excerpt from the Book of Tokens. But before we do this, we want to remind you of this fact. Some of you may not be aware of it, those of you who have come to us just recently. But the Book of Tokens was received inspirationally by Dr. Case and Michael Whitty. You remember we told you of Dr. Case's part in the previous incarnation of what our work is now. And at that time, this Golden Dawn was the channel, the outer channel for this particular training, and it fell apart because of the power drives, the gossip mongering, the slander, and so on, which developed due to the fact that the vehicle itself had developed flaws especially in what it permitted to come in. They had lost a great deal of their discrimination, and just like societies rise and fall, just like countries come into their heights and then they decline, you have the same principle that goes on in every facet of life, including the spiritual schools. And indeed, this is part of what keeps the line or chain of spiritual training in these schools alive, because from generation to generation, after a certain length of time, you have changes in your society. Evolution is taking place. There are different attitudes, there are different codes, there are different mores, there are different responses. And so always you need to bring in those changes, you need to put in those new interpretations which will make the same training as effective, but with the addition of that which is needed for the particular time and climb. When I say climb, I'm being poetic. You know, I mean climate. It's the poet in me runs away from me once in a while. Now then, Dr. Case was given the mission of the reinterpretation, which was not changing. It was purifying and bringing into exoteric expression that which had been completely esoteric previously, And this, too, is part of what is necessary, because as humanity evolves, that which was esoteric can be made more exoteric. And so even here we can see the logic of this type of development. Well, Dr. Case and Michael Whitty were what you might call a polarity combination. And through their inner function, inspirationally, as a polarity, they were able to set up a communication with the Master, who is behind our work, as we've told you before, the Master R, wherein this Book of Tokens was received. Actually, what the Master did was act as a link to bring in a certain part of the Akashic record. And that is why those of you who have read the beginning of the Book of Tokens have noticed this explanation that Dr. Case gives of the work possibly coming from some unknown Kabbalist. But everything that has ever been done resides in the Akashic records, which incidentally is the divine memory. And some there are who, here and there, under special circumstances, are able to tune in to certain portions of this cosmic memory and thereby bring back into expression, or bring into the outer expression of the now, something which was created or thought or written or something that has occurred in past times. So the Master R, who was the communicating being, did bring in this channeling, this tune-in. You might say he acted as the plug-in for that portion of the Akashic record, so that it could be played on the tape of the present manifested universe in terms of the time and space where Dr. Case and Michael Whitty were, plus the amanuensis who wrote it down. And after it was brought through, the Master requested that it be given to Dr. Case to finish off, because it was only in its rough draft that it was first received that way. And this type of communication requires this type of condition. When you go into such a mass of amazing information and meditations, as most of you who have the Book of Tokens know by now. Well, during the reception of these Kabbalistic meditations, those who were involved in it also had the advantage of actual communication from the Master, giving commentaries, which have never been published, incidentally, although Dr. Case quoted a few of the commentaries in the Book of Tokens, but very few. And the reason they have never been published, really, if you want to know the truth, is that we have so many human beings still stuck in a morass of the mass mind thinking, feeling responses in terms of what is good, what is bad, what is right, what is wrong, condemning, gossiping, and so on. That, well, as Jesus once said, if ye knew the truth, you could not bear it. We have to evolve to an ability and a capacity to receive the truth, that is which is real in terms of the universal ethic and not the man-made ideas. So much of what the Master communicated, people just are not ready to hear. And those who do reach that place in our work, in the chapter, in the esoteric training, and who have shown in ways that are usually known, these people do have the ability to receive, and to these it is given. It is not that we want to hold back anything. But what we must do is guide and test and guide. Because if you give too much, if you tell too much too soon, you can often stop an aspirant from finding true realization because they could not bear it. And perhaps you will understand what I mean a little more when we're through with tonight's class. I always tremble a little bit, really, when I take up the subject we will take up tonight, because it is impossible that we will not hit into some serious emotional traumas in some of you. And at this point, we usually lose some of you, and this hurts us, because we want you to be able to keep an open mind and to go along with the possibility of things not being exactly as they seem. Nevertheless, it's our responsibility to give the truth as we have been taught it. It is our responsibility to hold back nothing which is supposed to be given at certain points. And so we just have to take the risk and pray that as time goes on, less and less of you will find themselves outraged over something that perhaps would have a very different effect upon you if you could really tune in to the real profound value of God's intention for all of us. So before I go into what I'm going to, you see, what I'm doing really is strengthening my spine and gaining help from the boss. That's the term we have for him, more in fun and affection than anything else, because the one thing a master doesn't do is boss you. He gives you the teachings through the methods that are given, and the personal life, this you must run yourself. And we have not yet warned this group, so we might as well do it right now. If you ever come across any teacher anywhere who tries to tell you how to run your personal life, what to eat and what to drink and what to wear or not wear, as the case may be, or not eat or not drink, who tries to tell you where to live or where to run, I hope you will really run, but not in the direction that you're instructed to run. Because no true master ever directs the personal life of an aspirant. Otherwise, what would happen to our growth? No mother and father who loves a child is going to keep that child from having its falls in order to learn how to balance itself so it can walk and run and climb. And the same principle holds true. We're given the teachings, and we use them to the best of our abilities. And we have our falls, and we make our mistakes, and there's nothing evil in that. The only thing that really, in a sense, might be called evil is not trying. That's what Dr. Case always said, and he received that from the Master, too. And I'm sure we're all familiar with the idea, in any case. So I'm going to get a little help here by reading you a little portion, and then we'll go into a more intimate discussion of it in terms of the path and the next grade on the tree of life, which is involved in the esoteric training techniques. This commentary, incidentally, was made in terms of the Hebrew letter Nun. That's the 13th tarot key, where that very beautiful fellow, Death, the skeleton, walks around reaping what looks rather like a gory harvest and hasn't got the meaning that it seems to have at all. And if we remind you that this particular Hebrew letter Nun and this particular tarot key called Death, 13th tarot key, we remind you that this is assigned to Scorpio, and Scorpio, each of the signs of the zodiac having assigned to it also a part of the body and its function. If we remind you then that the function assigned to Scorpio physiologically, as well as its psychic aspect, is the reproductive organs. Now you know what we're going to talk about. The reproductive organs. And you know the reproductive organs. These are the energies which in Eastern philosophy have been called the Kundalini energies. And that will give many of you a little more idea of the importance of this reproductive function and the organs which go with it. Now, here was a commentary made. The imaginative intelligence, incidentally, the Hebrew letter Nun, is called the imaginative intelligence in Kabbalah. This is also, remember, in terms of creation, and the reproductive organs are a creative function. The imaginative intelligence is, of course, especially active in the reproductive centers of the body, and hence Nun, through its correspondence to Scorpio, is attributed to those centers. Here, be careful to observe that the reproductive organism includes certain ganglia and the sympathetic nervous system. These are the Hindu chakras at the base of the spine, at the navel, or rather just a little below it, and at the solar plexus. It is by imagination that the serpent force in those centers is raised, so that the poisonous scorpion becomes the eagle of aspiration. Psychologists know that in primitive minds, the chief outlet of imagination is erotic, and this erotic tendency is never eliminated, even in the highest aspirations. I hope you heard that. That comes from the Master Art. All that is changed is the mode of expression, although the higher forms bear little outward resemblance to the crudities of gross imagination, so that we do not always find it easy to recognize the fundamental identity. You must wholly alter your conception of sex in order to comprehend the ancient wisdom. I'm going to repeat that sentence. You must wholly alter your conception of sex in order to comprehend the ancient wisdom. The story of the fall should be sufficient to afford a clue. Not until after the fall were Adam and Eve ashamed, and all our false sex modesty is the fruit of our remembrance of sex evils. We cannot too strongly insist that sex is sacred, and that it must be so regarded, for all the great symbols of the ancient wisdom have a decidedly phallic aspect. The error into which seekers for truth so often fall, as soon as they realize this fact, is in supposing that the way of regeneration is somehow related to the reproductive function of the sex organism. Nothing could be farther from the truth. It is the interior nervous organism, not the external organs, that is always meant in phallic symbolism, and the force that works through these interior centers is the great magical agent, the divine serpent fire. We have the almost superhuman task of creating a new set of associations with the word sex, because after all, certain aspects of the truth must be worked out to practical application through exercises which will lead only to the most terrible results unless the minds of those who undertake them are first completely purged. False modesty must be replaced by a high and reverential attitude of respect for the centers where the fire of life is most active in the human body. That's a good preliminary. All right, now we will continue with the tree, and then at the proper points we will bring in a more detailed discussion of what is meant here. Now, we took you as far as Malkuth, the aspirant being advanced into the grade of Malkuth. Remember, we told you that this stirred the parts of the nature which were involved with the elemental forces, and that in Malkuth we dealt with the elemental forces of earth, also incidentally called the gnomes. And there are gnomes, truly, and sylphs, and undines, and salamanders. All sorts of people, and children particularly, have seen them down through the ages. We have reports of it in literature. to an astonishing degree. And indeed, one can hardly go to some affair where a bunch of metaphysicians or occultists or those interested in things psychic are gathered, where one doesn't hear at least one, and usually more than one person, relate some experience where they discovered through sight, usually, sometimes through some of the other supersensory functions, the actual existence of what are called these elemental forces. And if you will remember that the elemental forces, so-called, really are different levels of God consciousness, that nothing in the universe is non-conscious. We know that the term has come in through psychology, unconscious, but remember, those who use the term unconscious merely are pointing to a very intensive kind of consciousness, which is not self-conscious. Nevertheless, it's there and exerts its power. And dreams usually bring out an awareness of those parts of the nature. Nevertheless, the thing that we must remember at all times is that nothing lacks consciousness. The earth, the air, the water, the fire, these are levels of conscious expression. Therefore, they have their forms, their psychic or subtle forms, as well as their outer or physical forms. And all physical form, it is taught in Ageless Wisdom, is made up of the combinations of these forces, these elemental forces, which are consciousnesses. And this is where the terms have come in that relate to the little folk, the fairies, and some of you perhaps have read books that have mentioned the devas, the angelic beings. These are all part of the what is called the angelic kingdom. And the elementals, the gnomes, sylphs, undines, and salamanders, are the lowest form of the angelic kingdom, which works hand in hand at all times with the human kingdom. It's a parallel evolution, incidentally. And also it is taught in the Ageless Wisdom that although the higher angelic beings are more highly evolved than man, man, in essence, has the potential of being more highly evolved than any that have been evolving through the angelic kingdom, because in man and man alone resides the potential God, that is, being able to come to the full creative realization, the full conscious participation in divine will in its truest sense, in its most complete sense. So, you see, we are something pretty staggering. And if we would hold that in mind a little more often, perhaps it would help us dissolve some of our inferiority complexes, at any rate. So the stirring of the earth elemental part of the nature comes in. And remember what we told you, this stirring always takes a double form. That in us which is still tied to inertia, which is still undeveloped, which is fixated in negative or outworn form. This gets stirred just as well as the positive side. And it must, because not until it's stirred into activity can we take from the negative part of ourselves and transmute, melt this down, so to speak, with our own consciousness, with our own drives, our own aspirations. Melt this down and utilize these outmoded forms into the newer creature, the positive expression. And it's difficult. No one ever said it was easy. Those who tell you it is easy are not telling you the truth. But we have to be willing to take up the exercises of dancing if we would become dancers, or of music if we would become musicians. And in the same manner, we certainly must be willing to take up the exercises and disciplines of becoming master of our elemental natures if we would attain to that which we aspire to. This is the primary job, and that is why the entire tree below the yellow sephirith, those four are the elemental nature, and these, remember, we call the personality. The powers of the personality are involved here. So, remembering that the various sephirith carry with them their particular tests and trials, and these tests and trials are not so much that which we go through when we're going through the ritual ceremonial participation with those who've gone before us. These stir it, but they start taking place in our outer lives. In fact, this is one of the most important functions of real initiation and the advancement ritual ceremonial initiations, that it stir the nature so that things will start happening outside. Because not unless they happen in our environment are they really happening inside. You know, as above, so below. And since creation comes from within to the without, the stirrings show us what is happening when we look in the without. Nevertheless, it doesn't all happen right away. Remember what we said. Each is a seed that must take its time to be nourished, to grow. With some, it grows faster than with others. Some people don't even begin to go in for the real tests and trials until they have had the first stirrings through the initiations and advancements for years. Others start going in for their various tests and trials almost immediately. It varies with everyone, and therefore no one can say to you, it will take you so long. It takes so long to go through the stirrings, but the length of time is different for everyone in terms of the blossoming, because of the difference in each of us when we consider the various potentials, intensities, levels of insight and understanding. From Malkuth, then, the grade of 110, called the Zealoter, when the tests have been passed, and they're very rigid, they're done under supervision, and they're difficult, and yet anyone with average intelligence can pass them if they've got the stamina. It takes a little more stamina than it does the super terrific IQ that some people think it requires. As a matter of fact, the emotional stamina and emotional intensity and motive is really more important than the IQ level. And yet it is very important that there be a certain degree of IQ level. Because if we haven't got the minds to understand, we really won't have what we need to direct the emotions properly. But we must never think that someone who's a sort of mental giant has more capacity than someone who isn't. This is all that we're trying to say. And as a matter of fact, our mental capacity grows as we go along with these initiations. It actually does. We've even had a few tests done quietly at one time where we found the IQ had jumped in certain really talented aspirants, those in whom the work worked more rapidly, that the IQ had jumped as much as 60 points in a period of 7 years. This is something very little known, but it does occur because you take away the blockages, and that which you are and the talents you have can come up and start expressing. So if you think that you're not so bright mentally, develop good, hard push and aspiration, determination to keep going. You'll be amazed at what you'll do with your mind, and vice versa, the mind to the direction of the emotions. Then I want you to look at the tree now and notice that the tarot key number 21 is the key that connects Malkuth to the Sephira above it. Sephira is singular and Sephirith is plural, by the way. Now, that is called the 32nd path. You see, we are traveling backwards, or I like to think of it more inwards, or some like to think of it as upwards. Inward is the best term to use because it's really more in accordance with the way it happens. Now, the 32nd path actually is the 21st tarot key. And don't get confused here. There's a certain numerical correspondence between each, starting with 0 in the Fool, for each of the tarot keys as tarot keys. Then there's another numerical series in terms of their paths, because the secret in understanding the whole initiatory pattern, this is something that many have not known. They've read a bunch of books and they've confused themselves because they haven't had this oral instruction, though now it isn't oral anymore, but it was only oral at one time. Fact is that the 10 Sephirith are called paths also, so that when you think of it in terms of the tree with the paths, you think of it as number 1, the white circle, the crown. Number 2, the gray circle. And you remember, as we explained at the beginning, like that lightning flash, it goes 1, 2, 3, on down to 10. Then, the 0 tarot key becomes the 11th path. It's number 0 as a tarot key. It's a number 11 as a path. And that will keep you from being confused. So if we keep going with the paths then, and then they go in their sequence, you can see that when we get to the last path, they're called the 32 paths of wisdom in Kabbalah. The last path, the 32nd path, becomes the first one that we traverse backwards down through the series, except that we also take in each of the Sephirith as we travel back and forth in the self-investigation and self-awakening. Now then, this 32nd path, which is the 21st tarot key, which is associated with the Hebrew letter Tav. The ancient way of writing that particular Hebrew letter, when Kabbalah was first practiced, way back God knows when, certainly we don't know, was actually in the form of a cross. When anyone wanted to write the letter Tav, they made a cross. And indeed, this is one of the reasons the cross has such vital importance in symbolism. Because remember, Jesus, who was trained in Kabbalah to receive the full initiations, remember what he said in one of the books? He said, "Lift up thy cross and follow me." Now, this particular path is assigned to the planet Saturn. The whole knowledge of esoteric astrology is tied up here, too, in these paths of return. It's the awakening of those parts of our nature which are connected in the subtle, spiritual, psychic links with our entire solar system, and then beyond. And this has to deal with the inner currents, of which we have a replica in our own organism. We are a miniature of the universe. And so this is assigned to the planet Saturn. And remember, those of you who come Sunday mornings working together for awakening the 7 chakras, which in Kabbalah are called the 7 holy planets. This particular tarot key, that Hebrew letter, is assigned to the planet Saturn, which is the chakra at the base of the spine. And remember what we read to you from the commentary of our master about the 3 centers which were involved with the reproductive function and with the sex function, both on its outer and inner implications. So here, this particular path deals with the Saturn center. That is where the energy is said to be coiled up, the Kundalini energy. And it is awakened from that level, where when we become a completely illuminated being, it goes up through all the chakras, and we have a full realization or illumination. Usually it doesn't stay there, because this starts, and then we have more work and practice to do, but wherever anyone has a true illumination, it's because that energy was able to shoot up the spine from Saturn to Mercury, that is, the one in the pineal gland, and thereby open the gates of consciousness. I have a tickling. Now, lifting up the cross involves many things. Particularly, it involves picking up all this inertia from Malkuth. That's where it's coming up from. This being stuck in old patterns. This being fixated in things as they were and as they are. This being willing to open ourselves to the new, the real. And it has to do with many other things, which we cannot go into because we'll never cover the full tree if we do that. But the part we are going to cover is the implications that are involved in that path and the sephira that it takes you to. In actuality, in going from this grade of 110, Malkuth, to the grade of 2-9, which is called Theoricus, there are two parts. One is the ritualistic ceremonial part that awakens and stimulates that center in the organism, the Saturn center, and the psychological correlates. That is, the stirring of those awarenesses which are going to start the process going, which will forever, once it's started, it'll keep going, cure us of thinking of anything physical as being solid or stuck that way. It will start us in the process of being able to see our own physical vehicles as a group of forces being held by the higher self. In other words, we will not be materialistically minded no matter how spiritual we think we are. You know how we keep giving physical form the causative factor in everything that happens. We will stop being able to do that as time goes on once that is stirred. And then the second part of that particular advancement takes us through a ritual ceremonial that involves Yesod, the foundation, that violet circle, which is 2-9, which is called Theoricus. And here is where we go into the part that I have always trembled at bringing up. And in fact, I'm being so clever, I'm going to be able to put it off until after our intermission, a good portion of it. Anyway, before we have the announcements and intermission, though, I want to bring out the first vital part of it. And that is that here we are dealing with the elemental part of the nature, which is called air, and the sylph. And you can see also if the logic of these symbols as they occur and stimulate the inner being, when you realize that the dancer in the tarot key, the world, which leads to that, she's dancing on air and showing us that it is the elemental air which is more of a foundation, more substantial than that which we call physical matter. That is just one aspect of it which is involved. Now, what is foundation? Our philosophy of life is usually our foundation, is it not? And of course, we think the earth whereon we stand is our foundation. But actually, that which we think and feel, the way we interpret ourselves and the way we interpret our universe and our environment, this is our foundation. And here, then, the aspirant is given the theory of creation in terms of ideas which you are all very well familiar with because you've been given certain portions of it all along in your lessons that you receive at home. Thought and emotion, desire and what we image, these are the foundations for Malkuth. That is, for physical embodiment, whether it be our own physical bodies or the physical body which is our environment, or whatever physical manifestation we make. That which we desire, there where our emotions go. And therefore, the way we interpret ourselves, because this is an emotional thing. You know, I am pretty or I am ugly, I am fat or I am thin, I am good or I am evil, I am weak or I am strong. Don't we say these things about ourselves? You know, I have a temper, or I'm angelic. Of course, I always insist on saying I'm angelic, whether I think it's true or not. I figure that it's good conditioning, just for the fun of it. Nevertheless, the foundation, you can see why that is called foundation. And incidentally, this is the sephira, which is assigned to subconsciousness. This is the sephira, which is assigned to the astral world. This is the sephira, then, which is the sphere of illusion. And this is the sephira, which is assigned to the reproductive organs of the grand man. And just think of this for a moment, then we're going to have our announcements. Is it not a fact, when we speak of the reproductive organs of the grand man, and this is called foundation, astral world, so on. Is it not a fact that the thing that drives all living beings is the reproductive urge? And I don't mean just man, all living beings. Of course, right now, they seem to be busier with the boom boom and shoot shoot and bomb bomb in the various plays and moving pictures than they used to be, perhaps. But even in these, you always have a love motive, haven't you? Unless it's a power motive, which in a sense is love. But the love motive is usually the motive that has been utilized more than any other for stories, for plays, for songs, for poetry. It is the push of consciousness. And the reproductive organs of the grand man, don't forget, are being, when the term is used, it is being used in its actual sense. This is no symbolic sense at all. In its actual sense, in this way. If God is all there is, and the entire universe is God's vehicle, that is, the entire outer universe is God's vehicle. Therefore, wherever you see the reproductive function taking place, what can it be but the reproductive organs of the grand man exercising their function? Can you see that? That is a good beginning before I run away into the intermission. Before that, we'll have our announcements. And then we'll go into the real discussion of the significance of sex and what we must learn to understand in relation to it for this grade, and why, just why it is so important. Now for a few announcements.
This Tuesday, we have our last finance class for the season. Those of you who are BOTA members who would like to come and see what makes us tick, we'd be most happy to have you visit us. And this Sunday, the title of our lesson sermon will be How to Find Your Way Out of the Darkness Through the Qabalistic Use of Color and Sound. Next Thursday, of course, Reverend Davies will be giving lecture number 5 on the Qabalistic path to the inner plane. Now, those of you who are planning to enroll your children in our Sunday school class, please don't forget to get their names and ages into us, as we only have room for 5 more children. So do enroll them now. We will not be able to take them after we have the limit of 5. Not because we don't want them, we wish we could just have all of them. We just don't have room right now for all of them. So please do get the names in on time. Now those of you, some of you stopped this evening and asked me about the beginner's class, the new beginner's class on Canayons in the fall. There will be further announcements on that. We are going to have it, but please let us have your names and addresses now. You must be a member of BOTA in order to attend the Canayons. So let us have your names and addresses now, because there must be a minimum of at least 12 members in order to open another Canayon. So those of you who are interested and spoke to me this evening, get your names and your addresses in, so that we know how many we have. What does it mean? What? Canayon? Yes. Well, there's an explanation about it in the New Addison News note. you'll read about it, because I don't want to take up time this evening and take it away from the lecture. But there's quite an explanation of it in that. Thank you.
We'll now have about a 5-minute intermission.
You don't love me anymore.
If she doesn't, I'll love you twice as much. Oh, well, but I love her, too. We'll love her into it.
I love you anyway.
Beloved members and friends, Jesus said, only the pure in heart can see God. Let's examine this. This particular sephira in Kabbalah, incidentally, is called the pure or clear or purified intelligence. And it's in this area that purification must take place. And indeed, it takes a long time. And what do we mean by purification? Here's the point. Not what the world means. This is why we always sort of heave a sigh when we come to this part of the work and its explanation, knowing that those who are conditioned by the thinkings of the world, and incidentally we all are going to have parts of their nature sent into shock. Only the pure in heart can see God. And remember what I read to you from the commentary by the Master when he said that not until the fall of Adam and Eve were they ashamed. We're going to explain this to you as best we can, because truly this we can say to you, and we say it from the depths of our hearts. Not until you have transmuted your responses to that whole question are you going to be able to safely travel the paths of return. This is the crux of the matter, you see. This is why it's so important. The entire drive of the universe, as we read to you from the Book of Tokens, is the desire of the one life to unify with itself. And remember what it said, know me then in the bond of union between creature and creature and their creator. Now, what have we been conditioned into thinking and feeling by the mass mind, by the lowly evolved, by the less evolved, by the darknesses of yesterday's immaturities? What we've been conditioned into thinking is that sex is dirty. You know that. How about the leers? How about all the little shady jokes that have the twists of ugliness? How about the dangerously sick focus that the mind of man has on, say, the sex functions of his fellow man? I know a woman whose husband was very active in union work, and so lots of men kept coming up to their homes. She was a young and attractive woman. And men, lots of them young, some of them not so young, kept traipsing up to that apartment. Well, do you know what the neighbors decided? The woman was a prostitute, and the man was her, you know what, there's a word for it, the husband, that is. Otherwise, why would all those men be traipsing up there? They didn't have anything more important to think about. In this case, the husband and the young, attractive wife had a good sense of humor. When they heard that, they were very amused, and even joked about it and said, we certainly live in a state of poverty considering the good business we do. See, they had a good sense of humor. Their hearts were pure. So they didn't have to be outraged either, if you're getting what we mean. And it isn't only in that sphere. I mean, this particular sephira has to do with patterns of all kinds, except that in that particular area, this is where the energy that takes us to God resides. The energy that takes us to God is the Kundalini energy. And this is where our greatest problems are, though there are other problems that result from hanging on to the patterns, the ideas, the dirty mores of a community. And we mean it exactly as we say it. For example, just to give various other types of incidents or examples, we are always so concerned, aren't we, about the other person's ethics. Other people are liars and we're honest. This is part of the Sephira. And usually when we think this, we are the most dishonest, because you see the greatest problem is the self-deception. And the truth is, you cannot tell the truth to another person unless that person is able to hear the truth and you know the truth to tell it. What about these husbands and wives? I mean, we're not singling out anyone who, well, but we'll just take the husband in one instance, who go about telling young or not so young females that my wife doesn't understand me, and then proceed to have their cake and eat it too. And the party involved, how often, I don't know how many of you read the column, Abby's column in the newspapers, but quite regularly we have some woman writing in about something like, I'm in love with a married man who says that when his children are such and such an age, he'll divorce his wife and marry me, or he's given me a ring, and so on. What shall I do? He doesn't get along with his wife. And, of course, Abby is very clever. She usually says something to the effect, a man who's unfaithful to his wife, if you really succeeded in getting him, you'd only have a husband who's unfaithful to his wife. Nevertheless, this isn't exactly what we are referring to. Basically, it's the self-deception that people practice. In essence, people who are married to people whom they're not happy with, usually they're happy with them. You know, psychological research, and it's been announced in all sorts of conventions by psychiatrists, show that these so-called unhappy marriages where people just don't get along and fight and have all kinds of problems, that really this is what they want. They want a sparring partner. And they wouldn't leave their marriage for anything in the world. They're not out for harmony, they're out for fight. It makes them, this is so. And they don't recognize it consciously. So this is the self-deception that they practice. And we have the reverse, just as much with various married women who feel that because their husbands don't understand them or their husbands aren't exciting, why then they can play around a little bit on the outside. And at the same time, they wouldn't dream of leaving the husband because you know why? He's a meal ticket. Well, let's face it. In other words, but in our society, legal prostitution is thought of as pure and good. And legal prostitution involves the man or the woman who live together and unite with a secret hatred. But these are good and these are pure. And then when other persons do this, if they haven't got that little ticket that they pay $2 for, but with this inflation, hasn't the price gone up recently? Or well, you know what I mean, don't you? A man-made certificate does not make for union. Now, what is union, truly? Of course, there's union on all the various levels. This we've got to realize. And before we go into that, let's consider a few other ideas that are rampant in society. For example, we know that many schools of occultism, and also Orthodox religion perhaps, unfortunately too, pretty much in various ways let it be known that sex is really a pretty dirty thing. You know, it's carnal, just plain carnal. And you can't really attain to spiritual anything if you're carnal-minded, we are told. Well, in that case, don't you think that the priests and the nuns and those people who enter monasteries and various other types of groups who go in for complete celibacy, shouldn't they have the most glorious attainment of Christ, of God, since they're not carnal or they've given up the carnal? But is it so? Is it so? And of course, then there are others that say you're not spiritual if you take a drink. In that case, does that mean that all the prohibitionists who marched around cracking windows and militantly singing all kinds of wonderful songs about the way they're going to save the world, were these close to God, the prohibitionists? And then they'll say if you smoke, you're not spiritual. Or if you cuss, you're not spiritual. And or if you eat certain foods, you're not spiritual. What is this, my darlings? Have you stopped to think? Have you stopped to think what this is? This is all part of what stirred in Yesod, the foundation. And it must be stirred. And fortunate are those who have this stirred right away. And unfortunate are those who are the slow process types where the stirrings do not take place until they've gone through various other grades, because they will truly have a much more terrible time later and even break their obligations. And what they build for themselves is sorrow indeed, but that apparently is necessary for their eventual growth, though definitely it certainly wouldn't be in this incarnation if they get fooled by themselves because of their own dirty and self-deceived minds. Who are the people who stick up their noses at those who they may think indulge in carnal appetites? The fact that they think so wouldn't make it so. Or those who might like a little wine with their dinner, or a cocktail before dinner, or those who might enjoy a cigarette. The great saint, Sri Krishna, Ramakrishna, he was a chain smoker, you know, and no one could deny his saintliness. But according to so many of these bigoted human beings, and unfortunately, you see, here's the point. In occultism, you find more bigotry than anywhere else in the world, and this is the tragedy of it. Aspirants who should know better use occultism to make themselves feel superior to their fellow man. And what is it that Jesus said? Do you remember what he said to the woman who was about to be stoned? He said, "He who is without sin, let him throw the first stone." Isn't that beautiful? And you know what was said of Jesus, don't you? This was a very evil man, it was said of Jesus. He hung around drunkards and prostitutes. Well, didn't he? The publicans and the sinners. He hung around, apparently, according to the spiritual people, the Pharisees. These really spiritual types pointed out that this man certainly couldn't be the Son of God or the Christ. How could he be when he hung around in what today we'd call nightclubs and cocktail bars? You know, the sinners, and made friends of prostitutes? That in itself showed. And then, my God, imagine his having the nerve to do healings on the Sabbath. You can see how unspiritual he was. Well, do you think that humanity, here and now, says anything different of those who do not follow their prescribed ideas of morality, which they have gotten from the dark side of yesterday's evolution? This is what they do. How often have one of you been unwholesomely interested in the, shall we say, romantic aspects of another individual and clicked your tongue at their lack of morality? And did you really know? If we are supposed to follow Jesus, if this is our great example, should we not wake up, all of us? Because we've all done it, you know that. Maybe some of us just a little bit, and some of us more than a little, and that's all right. We've all done everything, my darlings. The important thing is to see it, to wake up, to transmute it, change it. For every transmutation we make in an attitude that is tied to the dark side, the condemnatory side of the nature, for every little transmutation we make, a choir of angels sings. You know, they always rejoice more over one sinner, as they say. So it's better, in a sense, to have sinned and and have reformed. You know, again, that's what they say of the Messiahs. For some strange reason, they've always loved the sinners. Of course, one of the reasons for that is they knew that they certainly weren't going to reform those who had no sin, who wouldn't dream of thinking or feeling carnal aspects, who wouldn't think of taking a cocktail before dinner or a bit of wine or a cigarette or of being seen eating meat on a Friday or pork, if it's another school of thought. See, whatever the idea is of the moment, this is what's used, or of the time. And after all, people who are so pure and so holy that they are able to look down their noses at their fellow man and condemn them, the Messiahs don't need to help them, do they? So they go after the sinners, these terrible sinners. And perhaps it's because only those who have sinned, in the real or perhaps true meaning of sin, are the ones who are open to becoming something more. Only when we've been through something ourselves can we have compassion for the other fellow. Remember, I quoted to you last week, I will re-quote it. The old American Indian proverb, "Judge no man until thou hast walked in his moccasins for 3 moons." Could we try to remember that? I'll tell you a little something about Dr. Case to help in showing the vital essence of what is needed and why it is needed, that we go to work now on those parts of our nature which are prone to condemn other human beings for our idea of what their codes or ethics should be, or what constitutes spirituality. Dr. Case told this story to a class that he gave, and you know we lost about half a dozen out of that class the next time. And see, now I'm risking the same thing, and yet we must. We must because we owe it to you to help you to transmute the most vital area of your being, your responses to the whole, not only sex drive, which is that, but also to your whole attitude in relation to what you consider spiritual and non-spiritual. And believe me, the spiritual exists, but only when you throw away the old will you truly get the new, the real. Dr. Case told this story, and it's a true story. When he was on his way moving from the east out here to California, he found himself, he told the group, in Reno, where he had to stay for a short period. And due to certain circumstances beyond his control at the time, he had expected some funds. They didn't arrive. He found himself quite broke. On top of that, he suddenly became ill. He had been there about a month. In fact, he became so ill that in his hotel room he just fell into a complete unconsciousness. Now, it so happened that in that same town he had become acquainted with a card sharp, whom he used to like to talk to. See, he too, like Jesus, hung around sinners. And they had some very pleasant conversations. Well, this card sharp noticed he hadn't seen Dr. Case for 4 days. And he had made a habit of dropping in on him for a little chat every day. He got worried. And he didn't even know where he lived. So he got busy and started to inquire all over the town. Found out where he was registered. Came there and discovered Dr. Case unconscious and delirious in his hotel room. And he thought, my God, I have to go back to my job. This man needs care and attention. So he went and got a friend and explained this situation to her. The friend came. She took care of Dr. Case in the daytime. And the card sharp came and took care of Dr. Case at night. He happened to work days. And the friend, my dears, was a prostitute. That's why she had to be free nights, so she could earn her living. When he came out of his delirium, he had been in that state for about 10 days. He found this strange woman sitting there, taking his pulse, washing his brow. He didn't know what had happened. She explained to him that he'd really been one sick man. They had called a doctor, and indeed they had paid the doctor themselves. Well, he started to recover. She fed him by the teaspoonful every 2 hours. And at night, the man came. They nursed him through it for several weeks until he was up and strong enough to be on his own, and then he received funds where he was able to come on to Los Angeles. This was a prostitute and a card sharp. And Dr. Case was able to continue the work. It's because of a prostitute and a card sharp that you're here, that you receive those amazingly magical lessons. It's because of a prostitute and a card sharp that you have the help on the path of return, because he would not have lived were it not for that. And this is the story he told. And this is a true story. And what he did when he got out here, they had talked a lot about astrology and various esoteric subjects. He bought her a complete set of Llewellyn George's astrology books teaching everything from A to Z, and sent it to her as a gift because she was so interested. And she had a rather good education. She had been interested in sociology, had a very fine educational background, incidentally. She studied these books, and with her old training, her technical training, which had been considerable, she went into counseling. She stopped being a prostitute, and he never preached to her about being one or not being one. He loved her. As far as he was concerned, she was a saint and an angel. She did not know him. Like I was hungry, and ye fed me. I was thirsty, and ye gave me to drink. I was homeless, and ye took me in. This is the type of thing. Who are we to condemn other people's morality? Who are we? I know of a woman who had several children by one husband and a child by a second husband, who screamed with rage, and the veins stuck out of her throat and her forehead like a witch, who screamed, I am pure, I am pure. Believe me, I have never known what it is to desire a man. I am pure. She screamed at her children. And quite a few years later, this developing sense of guilt in relation to sex and the attitude toward sex, she got to a point where her enemies came into her house and did what good people do not do, against her will, she claimed, and then sewed up her very private areas in the reproductive functions, and she ended in a mental institution because this is how far her delusion went. Well, this is an extreme. But do you know there's such a thing as a slight insanity, which we call unsane, and this extreme kind, the pure in heart, my darlings, the pure in heart, who love God and love their fellow man, are not concerned how that fellow man is exercising his drives. They're too busy trying to transmute their own. Surely, if sex is such a carnal and ugly thing, surely God wouldn't have taken so much trouble to strew it around the world, would he now? Or would he? Would he now? Look wherever you will. Just plain look wherever you will. The tree, how is it born? How is it born? Through a seed that has been fertilized. You have your male tree and your female tree, or else you have the male and female organs on the one tree to fertilize and then grow that glorious miracle, a tree. God. God unifying, God growing. What is a flower, as we have told many of you before, and I'm sure that you cannot hear it often enough to be reminded. What is a flower? A flower is the sex organ of the plant. That is what a flower is. And what do we do with a flower? We go into raptures, if we're fortunate and can enjoy nature as we ought to, over the flower. And we inhale the beauty of its aroma. But when we do this, do we remember? This is the form of union between creature and creature and its creator. This is because God has a drive to unity on all the various levels of the being, of that self. Do we remember that? Look at all the little creatures. Wherever we look, and they are pure in heart indeed, like the sun that shines on the just and the unjust. The beauty of union takes place through this unconscious drive, which is the driving power of creation. Who begot you? How were you born? How was your body born? Were your mother and father evil? Or was God driving them into unification on whatever level they functioned, so that he could ensoul himself in the form which you are? Was that evil? What is evil about unity? There's only one thing evil about unity, and that's the evil in the mind and heart that uses it for nothing but a release of physical tension, which is all right for the animal, and it is fine for the animal, man and woman, who have not yet achieved their spiritual aspiration. But when we get to the point where we have true spiritual aspiration, what we must do is start looking on union, wherever we see it, in terms of reverence. And he who sees the sex act between a male and female who love, we repeat, who love, he who sees this sex act as the sacramental ritual expressing the unity of God, such a human being will never be even tempted to tell a woman, my wife doesn't understand me, or tell a man, my husband is crude. Such a person will not enter a union except love be the driving force, and except no one will be injured, and except God be the guide. Such is the truth. Such a person will not say, I am spiritual and I am therefore putting union out of my life. This doesn't make for spirituality. This makes for another excuse to think oneself better than the other. Do you know the sort of people who do the most condemning? They are more or less two types. Number one, they're the kind who are so ridden with guilt complexes that they would love to have the freedom to express union, but they do not dare. And so they're jealous of those who they think dare. And often they see it where it doesn't even exist, and even if it existed, the pure in heart wouldn't begin to see it. They'd be too busy with their own raptures at the unity of life and trying to grow themselves into the sacramental feeling which releases the energies tied up in patterns for spiritual experience, for true love of man, the true and all creation. And the other type are those who are pretty much just plain perverts, who are, again, usually envious or jealous. Most of the time you'll find wherever a man or a woman is very magnetic, really magnetic and attractive to the opposite sex, those who are not or who are jealous will love to point out the lack of morality in that individual, whether it's true or not. It's like, you remember we told you in that esoteric astrology class, you all were amused at it, and we told it that way really to break a little tension more than anything. But we pointed out to you when we were discussing Scorpio, which is exactly the sign we were discussing the commentary by the master, that the scorpion is said to be so magnetic that those who are not scorpions attribute to the scorpion an oversexed nature. And so they click their tongues and they say, scorpions, gee, they're no good. They're so carnal. They're oversexed. This is what so many, the great majority of astrologers have said of Scorpio. And actually, the truth is that the magnetism of the scorpion attracts the other sex, and it isn't that the scorpion is so sex desirous, it's that the opposite sex is so very overly sex desirous, usually towards the scorpion. And I mean, I just have repeated this in that way just to show that often those who are more or less perverted, or have a malicious streak, or have hidden guilt that they're not aware of, these are the ones who will be looking with an unwholesome eye, concentrating on looking for that which is unholy, and yet to the pure in heart, all things are pure. And to the one who has transmuted their own sex drive to the point where they see all unity as an expression on some level of the unity of life, such people will not even begin to be concerned with the other person's mores, because they will be in a state of purity. They will not even begin to be tempted in every direction, a beautifully turned ankle, or a handsome turn of the head, or this or that. These are not the things that will stir them, though they will appreciate the beauty. They will be stirred by the beauty of the heart and the soul. And these people will not become cold, passionless creatures who swear off sex in order to be spiritual. They will aspire, my darlings, they will aspire to becoming worthy of attracting a spiritual mate, so that together they can experience the real essence of unity. Because you see, the whole secret behind the very function that expresses on the physical plane reproductively, that same function has the interpermeating essence where two human beings who love, and love for the sake of God, these two human beings can experience the subtle higher levels of unity, and together find not only God, which is the only thing worth finding, but the power of their love can reach out and help lift innumerable others because of the beauty and purity that they can express. I hope we have made our position clear on that one point. We do not recommend promiscuity. Lots of people might think that. The point is, if we are busy condemning those who we think are promiscuous, whether it's true or not, we are feeding that part of our nature which should be purified into making us feel the sanctity, the reverence for that beautiful, glorious, and miraculous element in life which expresses as unity wherever we can see it, which expresses as unity on whatever level the creatures involved are capable of experiencing it. So let's try to keep this in mind in the future. And let's not be hasty in our condemnations. And if we have been, let's just forgive ourselves and say, well, I'm glad I have felt this way. That is, even condemnatory. Because now I can understand what makes other people feel that way. And in that manner, perhaps I can help them just by my love, help lift by my attitude that which is. This is what we must feel. And if we can, the point is, if we can truly transmute our responses and our attitude in that area and start seeing beauty and reverence and sacrament as we should be seeing it, it will become fantastically easier to rid ourselves of the other parts of our nature, which are such a problem to ourselves. We will have an influx of the divine love, because this is how you learn to express divine love. Because this is the way a human consciousness can know real divinity in and through loving in all ways, whether it be plant or tree or creature or mate. And the love of mate is the highest kind of love that one can experience. And if we want it, we've got to become worthy of it. This is the thing to remember. These are the stirrings that occur in this particular grade and much else that have to do with the patterns in our own subconsciousness. The old evils have to be stirred so we can see them and forgive ourselves and then transmute them. And it takes time, but it will take a much shorter time, my darlings, if we work on what we've been discussing tonight. Yes?
You don't say time about hypothesis.
All right, questions? Questions? Yes? Yes?
You mentioned the Kundalini. I don't know too much about it, all I've read some, but I have a book at home that tells that if you have a spinal, it's very detrimental to this Kundalini. It's supposed to go up, isn't that the idea? It comes up from the base of the
From the base of the spine, yes.
It's, according to this man, I think his name is...
The nerve currents.
Somewhere in Florida, I got this book. And but it was very detrimental. In fact, according to him, I believe you never could aspire to anything higher
Than what?
than what you were at the time.
Well, let your mind be at peace. I had a spinal when my leg was operated on, and I assure you that it never interfered in any way whatsoever with all kinds of higher levels of consciousness, including the full and absolute and complete knowledge that the universe is one, and I one with that, the indivisible, and much else of the secrets within it. If that were true, I couldn't have experienced those things, and I have. Yes?
I think it's going to be good for us to bear in mind that this Kundalini and the sex drive is also the same thing as the power drive.
Yes.
And very often those who deviate from the path, they go through the grades, and very often they do break their oaths, and they do deviate, and then they greatly delight in poisoning the minds of others, that we should be aware of these people, and usually ask ourselves, why?
Oh, you are magnificent. This is my Eleanor. This is one of the vital, important points I wanted to bring out tonight. And you see, in speaking about one aspect, I overlooked it. And you see, you can't trust her. She picked my mind. Nevertheless, I love her. I accept her as she is, and I love her. We have such a rapport there, as I have with Mrs. Case. It's really, it's delightful. You can be yourself when people are that close. But this is a very important point that the Reverend Presson just brought up. The stirrings of that area, if one doesn't wake up to see what's happening and transmute them, these energies, when they're held down, and we have erroneous conceptions, do go into the power drive. And in this power drive, remember, a power drive makes it absolutely necessary for the person who needs this power to be better than others, bigger than others, and that person must then start tearing down and trying to destroy those whom they are inwardly, either secretly or not so secretly, jealous of. And they will commit, and this has happened. It has happened right in our own work. It has happened when Dr. Case has been here. It happened, and it will happen, because you never know how some of the stirrings are going to affect some of the people. And what they do then, because they have been so stirred and they have not seen what it is they must work on, they start performing what you might call a mental assassination. This is murder. They deliberately tear down, and they often deceive themselves in this. They deliberately try to tear down the reputation of other individuals whom they see are in a place that they are jealous of, and they therefore will often perform tremendously destructive deeds. They are a danger, and we must, every one of us, watch our own hearts and our own souls and pull out this poison weed if we should see it raising its head, because it can do it with anyone. No one ever reaches anything where it isn't possible to fall under the subtleties of certain stimulations. And the one place just a minute, dear, and I'll let you, the one place we have to watch it beyond all else is where anyone is deliberately performing a mental character assassination on another. Never listen to the destructiveness in relation to another person. Listen only to constructiveness. And then you will be helping that person to be constructive if they don't happen to be. And often they are more than we think. We have wept many tears and suffered much, all of us who are in the work of helping to lift this tremendous energy, because it is inevitable there will be some who will go off on this negative, destructive side of their nature from the stimulus. This is why we must warn and love and warn at all times. Now, dear.
My question probably has two points. First, would you say that the majority of persons married otherwise, if any way they are practicing the type of inclination towards the sex urge that would comply with this very natural suggestion just given, and if not, what would you recommend?
Well, I think there are a few, very few, who are more or less prepared for certain parts of these practices. As a matter of fact, I have been toying with the idea now for about a year of having a special class for married couples in order to try giving them at least some of the first elementary teachings in relation to this, and from that one would have to take privately only those who really are ready for it. You see, Dr. Case and I were the same type of polarity team that Dr. Case and Michael Whitty were, and Mrs. Case bless her glorious and beautiful heart. She is an amazing soul. She was the amanuensis, and it was in this trio we received much of the most powerful type of teachings, a great deal of it relating to this very subject from the Master. It was during that period that I received the training for the direct contact in preparation for Dr. Case's going. And I have so much material, but you see, it requires readiness, because I would only injure others and not help them unless they were ready for this kind of teaching. And always my heart searches, and I figured the only way I could find those who were ready was to give a special class someday, which I am thinking seriously of doing on that one subject. Any other questions? Yes?
So much of the material tonight, I believe, is related to married couples. Single individuals, men or women, being God's children, have the same God.
Absolutely.
Would you kindly explain how this God can be projected into the creative force?
Yes, well, any kind aspiration and meditation in itself takes the same energy and helps to bring about the greater enlightenment, the enhancement of consciousness. And all sorts of creative acts will do it. Perhaps we ought to take that up more. We're past 10 o'clock. If you want to ask that question again next week, we will be dealing with other paths, and I'm going to cover the same subject from different areas of the paths to show its essence in from various directions through the other paths and the grades. So ask me that question, and I'll go into it a little more in detail. And then I think that will help. Now we must say good night, my darlings. Please don't run away. Do come back next week.